Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. In today's issue, we're going to continue our coverage of the ongoing situation, the ongoing crisis, conflict taking place between the Russian Federation, its allies, and Ukraine, and NATO, and the West. So, first and foremost, we'll start by looking at some of the headlines in the mainstream and not so mainstream news outlets. And again, it's for the most part rehashing a lot of what we have seen over the last few weeks. So let's see here. Bulgaria military news. You should know. Russia missile divisions are leaving for Crimea. The Kiev Independent, Ukrainian source. Russia led militants release toxic ammonia in Donbass, provoking red flag fears. RT, is Russia really preparing an offensive against Ukraine? 112 Ukraine International. U.S. prepares 18 scenarios in case of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Fairness and accuracy in reporting. Hawkish pundits downplay threat of war. And again, it just kind of the same sort of rhetoric, the same sort of information in terms of from both sides really continues unabated. Now, with that being said, we are getting new information about Russian force deployments taking place along the border of Ukraine. And we've received additional information about new units being deployed, this time from the far east. That unit specifically is all the way over here on the Pacific side, located near Vladivostok. This unit right here, the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade. Not a very big unit, but obviously one of those naval infantry units that are largely all contract soldiers, fairly well trained, motivated, and an aggressive formation. So again, the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade, consisting of one naval infantry battalion, one assault battalion, a tank battalion, a recon company, a flamethrower company. Again, that's not the traditional type of flamethrower you would normally associate, but more of a thermal barrack rocket launcher type device. One self-propelled artillery battalion, one reactive battery, one anti-tank battery, and one air defense battalion. Now, is that entire unit deploying? Again, difficult to say, but it does look like that either the entire unit or major elements of the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade are being loaded upon railheads and are being sent west. So again, the size and scope of this mobilization by the Russian military really can be looked at in two ways. First, they're either actually preparing for a invasion of Ukraine, or this is probably one of the biggest military operations in terms of the mobilization and the deployment of forces throughout the Russian Federation we have ever seen. And again, these forces are coming from all over the Russian Federation, and again, as far east as Vladivostok. We've already seen multiple units that you would say are east of the Ural Mountains being deployed again, such as the 41st Army Group. But again, this latest information would confirm that now we're seeing far east military assets being deployed east as well. And there was a German report that came out yesterday as well. It was Der Spiegel, was reporting out of Brussels that elements within NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, were actually concerned that what the Russians are doing could also be the mobilization for a possible move against actual NATO countries, not just going after Ukraine, but the buildup, the deployment of forces could be quite possibly the preparatory moves to at least prepare for a possible move against NATO targets. And the most likely NATO targets would be the Baltics. So again, if you look at those naval infantry deployments, we haven't heard too much about some of these units up here, such as the 61st Naval Infantry Brigade. This unit right here, the 61st Naval Infantry Brigade, to my understanding, is one of the better trained units outside of the airborne forces that the Russian military has in its arsenal. So again, when you think about Russian capability, first you look at the deployment of Russian airborne forces. Those are the fire brigades. Those are the first forces, the best trained forces that are normally deployed in the case of combat operations. And we've seen those forces, those airborne forces, even being utilized as even Marines or naval infantry in the Georgian conflict. And behind, after those airborne forces, you then have these naval infantry forces. Again, very aggressive, motivated, largely contract formations that are not conscript soldiers. So again, the question is, what are some of these units doing? We haven't heard a lot about these naval infantry units being deployed south along the border. We've been hearing a lot about the heavy units, the large tank and motorized rifle divisions and brigades being deployed along the border of Ukraine. Now that would make sense in terms of any sort of a lightning or blitzkrieg type operation that would take place into Ukraine. Now, with that being said, an operation against Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the Russians would not need to utilize some of those heavy forces. Again, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania do not have heavy armored forces. I mean, obviously they have some armored personnel carriers and some artillery, and obviously some infantry units, light infantry units, and anti-tank guided weapon systems. But beyond that, the need to deploy heavy forces into Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania probably would not be necessary. So the likely force composition that would go into Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the Baltics, not to say that the Russians don't have the ability to deploy heavy forces into the Baltics, but again, the need would probably, the actual forces utilized would be more like this unit, the 2nd Spetsnaz Brigade. You have the Air Assault Division there as well. Those naval infantry forces as well would probably be utilized to seize control of the Baltics. So again, you would see these lighter formations being used to quickly launch an operation into the Baltics, as opposed to the movement of these heavier forces. And at the same time, if you just think about this for a second, the Russians probably would not telegraph its punch by deploying heavy forces near the Baltics. They probably would not do that. They probably would utilize these lighter forces that could be transported and moved around, and they could probably do a better job and hiding an operation, especially a very large special operations with heavy components of heli-borne light infantry and road mobile light infantry as well, being deployed into the Baltics. So again, it's just something that I think you have to look at. As I talked about in the past, that if the Russians made a move on the Baltics, the likelihood that we would see a NATO response, a full-on NATO military response to retake control of those Baltic states, if they in fact were taken by the Russians, I would say is fairly remote. I think, again, it was a very poor decision to accept the Baltic states into the NATO alliance, especially when a lot of NATO members have allowed their militaries to atrophy, especially, as I've talked about before, the Germans really are in no position to launch a military operation to assist in retaking of the Baltic states, and just given some other issues going on within Europe and in the NATO alliance, again, I just do not believe a lot of these nation states would come to the aid of the Baltics. And if that happens, and those NATO obligations are not met in terms of coming to a member state, then what happens to NATO? Does NATO exist after that? And I would have to say no. Not on that, at least on the surface, it doesn't. I think the only way at this point we would see a NATO operation in which we would see actual NATO units come to blow or directly attempt to resist the Russian army would be if Poland was invaded. But again, you have to look at what capabilities are. And right now, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, in the state that it's currently in, would not have the ability, the military ability, to retake Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Again, the United States would be a large part of this and have to do a reforger. They would have to move heavy armored units into Germany or Poland. Most likely, it would be Germany and or France or the Netherlands or Belgium. The risk of the United States attempting to move heavy forces into the Baltic Sea to then have them offload in Gdansk or other places in Poland would be way too risky because of the anti-surface forces that are located in Kaliningrad and other areas as well, that would quite possibly make those forces susceptible to anti-ship attack. So again, we would probably see that reforger take place in Germany or some other Western European nation. And again, I just do not believe the current White House, the Biden administration, would be willing to go to war against Russia over the Baltic states. I just don't see that happening. Number one, we just don't know if we could win, and that's just the truth at this point, given the closeness of the Baltic states to the kind of the center of gravity of Russian power. That it would be a brutal, bloody war that would end up becoming World War III. And would Western Europe be willing to do that over former Soviet states, actual Soviet states, not client states, but actual Soviet states? Now, they're members of NATO, but again, that's here nor now. I mean, again, it's something that I just don't believe NATO would in fact do. And right now, given the size of the deployment and capabilities that are moving west, for all intents and purposes, the entire Russian military is now moving into the Western theater of operations. And then you have to ask yourself why. Is this a big political move by Putin to get the West to acquiesce to demands, or could this be something else? Again, very difficult to say at this point, but you have to wonder, given the size and scope of this military operation, is this in fact something that could in fact occur? Now, with that being said, if we don't see anything happen going forward, we're going to have to really look at how we cover things in terms of Russian deployments, because after this, and if nothing were to occur, it would be very, very difficult to continue in-depth coverage of said events. Now, that could be a Russian strategy as well, but again, it's very difficult to say at this point. But we'll keep our eye on the situation and report, and we're watching things very, very closely. A lot of moving pieces right now in terms of what is happening with Russia and Ukraine, and we will continue to bring you, the viewer, more information. Have a good day, everybody.